when wealthy mogul Jameson Cole tied the knot with his mistress in a stunning act of public betrayal. He was certain he was in control. But when his arranged wife reappeared in dazzling fashion, he felt the sting of regret almost immediately. Just how far would you go to protect your pride, to fight for a love long buried, or to reclaim what was once yours? In the glittering realm of the ultra-wealthy, secrets and betrayals are rarely kept hidden. And when the most powerful man in Los Angeles stages a public wedding to his mistress, every gaze shifts toward the elegant wife he so coldly cast aside. But behind the velvet curtains, a brilliant plan was already being set in motion. This tale begins with a shocking entrance at the most talked-about wedding of the year, an entrance that would shake high society to its core. You won't want to miss a single heartbeat of this unfolding scandal. Jameson Cole was a name that echoed from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. Known globally for his keen business instincts, he held ownership in tech powerhouses, led numerous philanthropic ventures, and stood firmly as the CEO of Cole International, a mega conglomerate with interests in everything from luxury resorts to bioengineering firms. Publications like the Los Angeles Times and Forbes hailed him as the man who always delivered results. In the glossy circles of the West Coast elite, whispers swirled around his private life. He was married to Juliette Montgomery Cole, a powerhouse in her own right, an heiress to the Montgomery estate. Her old money had helped shape much of California's wine country. For years, their union had been seen as a fusion of legacy and ambition, a marriage that symbolized grace and power. But more recently, there had been murmurs about Jameson's wandering attention, especially towards his mistress, Callista Ravon. Unlike Juliette, whose refined background radiated quiet poise, Callista was pure fire. A former runway model turned social media strategist, Callista thrived in the limelight. She wore her ambition like a designer fragrance, bold, intoxicating, and impossible to overlook. The affair between Callista and Jameson was the worst-kept secret in Beverly Hills. Still, no one dared to challenge Jameson openly, because in the upper echelons of the obscenely rich, rumor is currency and influence is everything. Few were willing to jeopardize their standing with a man who seemed to own half of Los Angeles. Yet, behind closed doors, the situation was spiraling fast. Juliette had confronted Jameson more than once about Callista. Each time, he met her with the same polished charm. "You're the only one who matters," he'd murmur, pressing a kiss to her temple, even as his late arrivals turned into full nights away. The staff at the Cole penthouse atop the Wilshire Grand did their best to erase the signs of his absence, but the cracks in the marriage were becoming too deep to conceal. It all came to a head one crisp autumn evening when Juliette quietly packed a small leather bag and slipped out of the penthouse, leaving behind nothing but a folded note on the marble kitchen island. She had reached her limit. Enough of the deceit. Enough of being overlooked. As the poised daughter of the Montgomery legacy, Juliette knew exactly what she brought to the table. And if Jameson couldn't see that, she would rather blaze her own trail. Each motion was deliberate, her fingers trembling only once as she folded her last blouse. The silence of the penthouse, once a comfort, now felt cavernous. She paused by the kitchen island, her hand hovering over the note, wondering if it would matter at all. A single tear slipped down her cheek, not out of sorrow but resolve. She wouldn't be a woman who begged for love. Not anymore. Her departure was anything but scandalous. She was tactful. Most of the household staff assumed she had left on a business retreat. So did Jameson. He barely noticed her absence until the next morning when he opened the closet and half the hangers swung gently into space where her gowns once hung, a quiet mockery. The sight struck him like a punch to the ribs. For a brief second, the air in the room felt thinner. There was a chill he couldn't name, a weight pressing at the edge of guilt. But he brushed it off, stuffing it into a place he didn't have to examine. His stomach tightened, but if there was guilt, it quickly twisted into something else, a sense of warped freedom. Maybe, he reasoned, this separation was the clean slate he needed to build a life with Callista. While Juliette lay low in Aspen, staying with her cousin, Dr. Olivia Hart, A respected neurosurgeon with a home tucked into the snowy hills, Jameson made his next move bold and public. He would marry Callista. Never mind that his marriage to Juliet remained legally binding. Never mind that the public had no idea whether their split was even official. Jameson wanted to show the world he was untouchable. And if that meant hosting the most extravagant wedding the country had ever seen, so be it. What he didn't realize was that this grand statement would ignite the beginning of a chain of events he'd regret for the rest of his life. News of the upcoming nuptials between Jameson and Callista spread like wildfire. Social media platforms from TikTok to Threads erupted. Though neither of them released a formal announcement, the whispers grew louder. An exclusive wedding was set to take place at a private vineyard estate in Napa Valley. Rumors circulated about a guest list packed with Hollywood royalty, global dignitaries, and the most elite business tycoons. Fashion magazines dubbed it the wedding of the century. Paparazzi swarmed the entrance of Cole International headquarters. Photographers staked out Callista's luxury high-rise in downtown LA. According to insiders, Callista had handpicked Matteo Duca, a visionary Italian couturier loved by LA's social elite, to create her bridal gown. She demanded silk flown in from Lyon, hand-embroidered pearls sourced from Tokyo, and a custom silhouette designed to flaunt every curve that had once stolen Jameson's focus from his wife. But Juliet, though heartbroken at first, was far from defeated, and far from oblivious to the unfolding events. She hadn't filed for divorce, not yet. And why she hadn't was a mystery even Olivia couldn't crack. Was it pride? Hope? Or was Juliet playing a longer, sharper game? Only Juliet could fully grasp the weight of what she read that morning, sipping a delicate cup of chamomile tea in the vaulted study of Olivia's Aspen home. It was there she stumbled upon an op-ed in Society and Style, a scathing column written by a well-known cultural critic. The piece lamented the decline of the once graceful Juliet Montgomery Cole, implying she was a relic of another age, outshined by bold, modern women like Callista Ravon. Juliet's cheeks flushed with heat. It wasn't just indignation for herself. It was fury for every woman who had ever been cast aside as if she were yesterday's news. "It's time," Olivia said gently, noting the steel in Juliet's stare. Juliet nodded. She wasn't just a socialite. She had reached friends in high places, influential contacts whose power rivaled even Jameson's. Until now, she had never needed to tap into those connections. But that morning, the embers of her old fire roared back to life. Her next move was subtle but devastating. Juliet reached out to Jonah Lee, an old family friend and seasoned investigative journalist with Coastal Network News in San Francisco. Through carefully measured dialogue, she orchestrated the leak of a sensitive case, an active lawsuit quietly brewing against Cole International, filed by former employees who alleged harassment and a toxic work culture during Callista's brief yet volatile tenure as interim marketing lead. It was a story Jameson had worked hard to suppress with expensive lawyers and discreet settlements. But the truth had never really disappeared, just buried, waiting. The leak ignited a storm overnight. The public perception of Callista quickly twisted from radiant bride-to-be to scheming opportunist. The wedding was still scheduled, but the narrative had shifted. For the first time, the glamour wasn't bulletproof. Furious, Callista demanded Jameson do something, anything. He scrambled to contain the fallout, enlisting elite PR firms and top-tier crisis consultants. But behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. Their first real argument erupted. "You're not defending me," Callista hissed. "And you're acting like I didn't build this for you." Jameson snapped back. Little did they know, Juliet was just getting warmed up. As the date of the wedding drew nearer, old alliances were reawakened, and long-held grievances surfaced in glittering ballrooms and exclusive lounges. This was the dance of high society, where power and betrayal waltzed hand in hand. One night, you're toasting vintage champagne with a trusted friend. The next, they're leaking stories to the press or sinking your business deals out of spite. With Olivia's quiet assistance, Juliet began making calls to old friends, powerful women with reasons of their own to dislike Callista. She reached out to Meredith Langley, a philanthropic icon in Los Angeles social circles, and Elise Laurent, a classmate from her finishing school days on the French Riviera. Both had their own grievances with Callista. Meredith, in particular, still burned from being publicly dismissed by Callista at a gala last spring, while Elise remembered a cold shoulder and a snubbed invitation that bruised her pride deeply. Now that Juliet was opening the door, they were more than willing to walk through it. The bitterness ran deep. Callista had once humiliated Meredith at a prestigious charity gala, publicly belittling her philanthropic work in front of a crowd of dignitaries. That sting still lingered. Elise, on the other hand, had extended an olive branch months earlier, inviting Callista to a secluded weekend gathering in Provence. She had been flatly, coldly ignored. The snub left a mark on Elise's pride, and from that moment on, she stood firmly against the ambitious mistress who now fancied herself a bride. So when Juliet opened up to them, confiding in quiet tones over secure calls, both women were more than willing to stand behind her. Juliet's voice, though steady, carried an undercurrent of pain that both Meredith and Elise immediately recognized. There was no melodrama in her words, just the weary calm of someone who had been pushed too far for too long. For a moment, neither of the women responded. Then Meredith placed a hand over her heart as if steadying herself and said, "She is going to wish she never crossed you." Elise, her voice clipped but fierce, added, "Let's give her a moment she'll never forget." The plan took shape with careful precision. Juliet would attend the wedding. She hadn't been officially uninvited, and legally, she was still married to Jameson. What she needed was an entry point that would not only shake Jameson and Callista to their core, but also allow her to reclaim her dignity. More than that, she wanted the world to see who she truly was. Meanwhile, Jameson was unraveling behind closed doors. The date of the Napa wedding was approaching fast, and his public relations team was in overdrive trying to smother lawsuit rumors and tabloid speculation. Callista, ever the showwoman, believed the best defense was a headline-grabbing offense. She struck a deal with a high-profile streaming network to film a limited docuseries chronicling the last week leading up to her wedding. Framed as a modern take on romance, it was, in truth, a vanity projected PR move to swing public opinion back in her favor. The cameras started rolling. Viewers saw Callista sampling floral arrangements, nibbling imported pastries, and directing a swarm of decorators like a royal preparing for coronation. To the public eye, it looked like the stuff of fairy tales. Her laughter rang out like chimes, calculated and melodic for every camera angle. Yet beneath that practiced grin, tension crackled at the edges. The staff tiptoed, the decorators avoided eye contact, and the scent of anxiety lingered heavier than the designer fragrances wafting through the air. But behind the curated footage, the crew saw something else entirely. Tantrums, ego clashes, and a bride whose demands bordered on tyrannical. Producers whispered among themselves. This wasn't just a wedding special. It was reality television gold. One afternoon, during a particularly tense dress fitting at the Meridia, Callista lost control. Enraged that the embroidery on her silk train wasn't delicate enough, she hurled a crystal-encrusted heel across the room, narrowly missing a mirror. Matteo Duca, famed for his fiery temper and zero tolerance for diva behavior, threatened to quit the project on the spot. It took Jameson stepping in, checkbook in hand, to keep Matteo from walking out. The bonus check he signed was astronomical a bribe, really. But to Jameson, money was the lesser cost, far preferable to losing control of the narrative in front of cameras. What none of them realized, however, was that the real twist was already in motion, engineered quietly by none other than Juliet Montgomery Cole. She had always been composed, elegant, but beneath her polished surface was a razor-sharp strategist, trained from childhood in the art of social chess. Raised under the influence of the Monroe family empire, she had watched her father close billion-dollar deals at dinner tables where conversation felt more like tactical warfare than small talk. And now, she would put those skills to use. She understood the art of patience, of watching, plotting, and striking at precisely the right time. A week before the wedding, Juliet quietly returned to Los Angeles under the radar. She checked into the Biltmore, a historic downtown hotel, using the alias Elizabeth Gray, a subtle homage to her grandmother's maiden name. No one in the media caught wind of her arrival. Meredith and Elise fed her steady updates, detailing the final phases of wedding prep, from the timing of private jet departures to which stylists and designers were being flown in. At the same time, the lawsuit against Cole International had begun to dominate headlines. More former employees had come forward, breaking NDAs and refusing to stay silent. They describe a work environment under Callista's brief reign that was toxic and demeaning. Jonah Lee's meticulous investigative series gave voice to those impacted, highlighting claims that Callista belittled staff, threatened careers, and imposed impossible demands and hours. The docuseries crews tried to dance around the scandal, focusing instead on glamour and romance. But viewers weren't fooled. Hashtags like Cole Collapse and Justice for Staff began trending. Back in LA, Jameson convened an emergency strategy session at Cole International headquarters. Callista joined via video from Napa, where she was overseeing final floral selections. Draped in an opulent ivory silk robe, she sat before a firelit suite and glared into the screen. Her tone was cutting as she barked at the board, demanding they bury the story. Most of the board, composed of aging, conservative men, stared in stunned silence as she issued directives like a general. Offer settlements. Intimidate them. Make this disappear, she snapped. The men exchanged anxious looks. Supporting Jameson was one thing. He made them rich. But Calistache was fast becoming a liability. From her suite at the Biltmore, Juliet knew it was time to act. She had no intention of merely showing up to the wedding. She needed something bigger, something indisputable that would crush the facade and reveal the truth. She enlisted the help of an old friend from her Stanford days, now working in government surveillance tech. Together, they embedded a miniature camera and high-sensitivity microphone into a custom satin clutch, blending seamlessly into Juliet's ensemble. Her goal wasn't just drama, it was justice. If she could record enough evidence of Callista's manipulation, cruelty, or even a confession of misconduct, she could not only discredit the entire wedding spectacle, but finally shield those who had suffered under Callista's reign. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about power and reclaiming it. The wedding was slated to take place at a centuries-old vineyard estate nestled in the Sonoma Hills, overlooking acres of olive trees and distant stretches of the Pacific. Surrounded by wrought iron gates and tall hedges, it was a fortress of privilege. Armed security circled the perimeter, but none of it could keep the world out completely. Media crews camped along the winding roadways below, telephoto lenses aimed and ready. Guests arrived via private jets, limousines, and even a few discreet helicopters. Local celebrities swarmed the venue. A-list actors, Grammy-winning artists, and a sprinkling of Silicon Valley elite-stack billionaires and entrepreneurs who had recently partnered with Jameson. Callista basked in the glow of her newfound social altitude. Even her estranged father, Thomas Vaughn, a man who'd barely been present for most of her life, showed up in a rented tux, visibly stunned at how far his daughter had risen. To preserve the air of exclusivity, Callista had all guests surrender their phones upon arrival. Security personnel scanned for unauthorized recording devices. No one was allowed to capture a single moment beyond what the official docuseries team had the rights to film. But what Callista didn't know was that a camera had already slipped through security, tucked discreetly into the clutch of the last woman she expected to see walking into the vineyard estate, Juliet Montgomery Cole. Juliet emerged from a sleek, jet-black limousine, flanked by Meredith and Elise. She was regal in a floor-length navy gown from the Montgomery archives, vintage elegance tailored to perfection. Heads turned, whispers ignited like sparks. Some guests recognized her instantly and kept their distance, unsure of what to say. Others stared openly, sensing the palpable undercurrent of tension. But Juliet walked with her chin lifted high, her every step silent but unyielding. She wasn't here to be pitted. She was here to reclaim her place. Staff guided guests into a candlelit courtyard. White orchids hung in suspended arrangements. Floating candles drifted across the fountain surface, and a quartet played a haunting classical piece. The sun dipped low over the rolling Sonoma hills, bathing the pink-toned villa in golden light. It looked like something out of cinematic dream. Upstairs, Callista remained in her private suite, eyes closed as a stylist touched up her makeup. The film crew moved around her like moths to a flame. She had no idea Juliet was downstairs, but Jameson did. A breathless event coordinator approached him backstage, nearly tripping over his own feet. "Sir, Mr. Cole, your wife has arrived." Jameson's face turned pale. A pulse of dread beat in his chest. He considered having her escorted out immediately. But what would that look like on camera? No less. It would be a public relations disaster. "Let her stay," he told the coordinator. "Just give me a minute." As Jameson adjusted his bow tie before a gilded mirror, he caught his own uneasy reflection. That deep, gnawing sensation was back in his gut. He couldn't shake it. He had always believed he had the upper hand. But now he realized maybe he had underestimated Juliet Montgomery Cole. The ceremony was set for sunset, the most romantic hour of the day. Rows of pristine chairs faced a marble altar draped in cascading white roses. The front row was filled with titans of industry, Hollywood elite, and influencers, all murmuring in anticipation. The film crew panned slowly across the guests, capturing every flicker of unease that now danced in the golden air. At the altar, Jameson stood tall, his smile fixed. He told himself he was in control. He told himself the wedding was going forward. But deep down, he remembered that look Juliet always wore when backed into a corner. Cool, intense, and calculating. And it scared him. The guests were all in place, and surely Juliet wouldn't dare cause a scene in front of such a high-powered audience. At least, that's what Jameson told himself. Still, he couldn't stop the cold sweat gathering beneath the fine stitching of his bespoke tuxedo. Then at last, Callista appeared at the far end of the aisle, her arm linked with that of her father, Thomas Vaughn. She wore her custom Mateo Duca gown, a luminous, hand-stitched creation that hugged her body before cascading into a dramatic lace train. A soft wave of awe rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in to capture every angle of her radiant, victorious smile as she soaked in the admiration and envy around her. Jameson focused on her walk, reminding himself this was his new chapter, for better or worse. But then, the hush of admiration shifted into a collective, startled gasp. Heads turned away from the bride. Murmurs erupted, fingers pointed. From the opposite end of the courtyard, Juliet stepped calmly into the aisle, her presence immediate and unshakable. The ceremony hadn't formally begun. The officiant stood near the altar, waiting for Callista's approach. But now everything paused. Callista froze in mid-step, unsure whether to continue or to confront the disruption. Her grip tightened around her father's arm as he leaned in to whisper something. The cameras swiveled, capturing every beat of the moment. Juliet remained serene. Her gaze was locked on Jameson. Meredith and Elise stood quietly at the edge of the aisle, alert and ready if things escalated. The courtyard fell into a thick, charged silence. Juliet turned to face the guests. Her voice, when it came, was elegant and steady. "Good evening, everyone," she said. "I don't intend to disrupt this celebration." She paused, the tension around her tightening. "But I believe some clarity is in order." Jameson opened his mouth, but said nothing. His throat tightened around empty words. Callista's face contorted, confusion morphing into fury. Her father took a cautious step back, clearly unaccustomed to public confrontation. Juliet continued. "My name is Juliet Montgomery Cole, Jameson's wife." Her words hit like a slap. "As many of you may know, our divorce has not been finalized. There are unresolved matters. This wedding, while extravagant, does not override certain legal realities." Callista let out a choked, incredulous sound. "What are you doing here?" she snarled, breaking away from her father and storming up the aisle. She stopped just feet from Juliet, her hands trembling with rage. The cameras zoomed in, recording every glare, every flinch. The guests shifted in their seats, some standing up as if bracing for a public meltdown. But Juliet stood her ground. "I'm here to remind everyone," Juliet said, her voice unwavering, "that no matter how extravagant the setting, no matter how selective the guest list or strategic the PR spin, truth cannot be purchased or silenced." She swept a graceful hand around the courtyard. This spectacle is not just a betrayal of me," she continued, "but of the very institution you all pretend to honor." Callista, trembling with rage, turned to Jameson. "Do something," she hissed. "Get her out of here." Security guards in dark suits edged closer, uncertain whether they could legally intervene against a woman still recognized as the groom's lawful wife. Jameson finally found his voice, though it wavered. "Juliet, please. Let's discuss this in private. Don't do this here." She gave a sad, almost amused laugh. "You already did this, Jameson, long before I got here." Then chaos erupted. The cameras kept rolling. Guests murmured in confusion. Some began standing. Others made swift exits, murmuring behind designer masks and sunglasses. The officiant looked stricken, clutching a script and scanning the venue for direction. And then, almost as if scripted by fate itself, a thunderous crack ruptured the calm. Guests gasped, some instinctively reaching for one another. It was the kind of dramatic punctuation that could only come from the heavens, too perfect in its timing to feel accidental. The storm broke. Rain poured down in thick sheets. Screams rang out as guests scrambled to cover silk gowns and salon blowouts. Men ducked beneath trellises, knocking over centerpieces. The sound system fizzled. The officiant's book wilted in his hands. Callista's hair collapsed into dripping chaos, her priceless gown soaked through. It was bedlam in designer shoes. A perfect storm, both literal and symbolic, a mirror to the chaos they tried so desperately to conceal. Juliet, ever composed, stepped back. A black umbrella unfurled above her, provided by the ever-prepared Elise. Without another word, she turned and vanished into the villa. Callista's scream echoed after her, muffled by rain and the shrieks of guests. Jameson stood frozen, drenched and stunned, his perfect life unraveling before the cameras and the crowd. But this was only the beginning. Inside the opulent drawing room of the estate, drenched guests tried to salvage what remained of the evening, toweling themselves off and muttering about the headlines to come. Rain beat hard against the windows, the once idyllic view now erased by a gray mist. Jameson and Callista retreated to a small lounge, the camera crew trailing them with a kind of hungry glee. The moment the door shut, Callista turned on him like a storm of her own. "This is your fault," she shrieked, tears streaming down her face, blending with ruined makeup. "You said she wouldn't be a problem. You said this day would be perfect, and now I'm a punchline." Jameson couldn't respond. His embarrassment and fury choked his words. He glanced at the cameras, silently begging them to stop, but they wouldn't. They were under contract, and this was exactly the content they had hoped for. Meanwhile, in a private suite on the other side of the estate, Juliet calmly removed the hidden recorder from her clutch. She dialed Jonah Lee, who was standing by in San Francisco, waiting for her update. She told him she had everything. Footage of the confrontation, the meltdown, and all the raw emotion that would finally cement the truth in the public eye. Jonah was thrilled. If aired, it would go viral instantly, dismantling all the carefully orchestrated PR Jameson and Callista had paid so heavily to construct. But Juliet's goal extended beyond public perception. She intended to hand over the footage to support the lawsuit against Cole International. Callista's explosive temper and borderline abusive language, captured during the altercation, could lend serious weight to the plaintiff's harassment claims. For Juliet, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about standing up for the voices that had been silenced beneath luxury branding and corporate manipulation. Her actions now had purpose, not just pain. Just then, Meredith knocked on the suite door. Elise closed it behind her. Both were breathless, flushed with adrenaline. "I think we should go now," Elise said quickly. "Security's looking for you." Things are getting tense. Juliet nodded, her expression resolute. I'm done here. Outside, the rain still fell in steady sheets. Guards were too preoccupied trying to salvage drenched equipment to notice as Juliet and her allies slipped quietly through a side exit. They climbed into a waiting town car, the tires splashing through puddles as the gates of the vineyard estate swung closed behind them. Inside the car, Juliet didn't speak at first. She stared out the fogged window, the storm-blurred vineyard a reflection of the emotional tempest she had just endured. Slowly, her shoulders eased, the weight of months lifting from her spine. She leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly. Phase 1 was complete. Inside the estate, Callista paced like a storm of her own, rambling about how to save face and reschedule. Jameson, exhausted and soaked to the bone, finally said what neither of them wanted to admit. It's over, Callista. We can't go on with the ceremony tonight. The officiant left. Half the guests are gone. This storm had ended it. Her eyes burned with fury. We'll do it tomorrow, or the next day. I'll pay for the guests to stay longer. This can still happen. Jameson just stared at her, stunned by her desperation. In that moment, he saw her differently, saw just how far she was willing to go to preserve the illusion of control, of victory. It wasn't love anymore. It was theater, and the curtain had started to fall. The illusion had already begun to crumble, and for the first time, Jameson felt the true chill of regret take root in his chest. By morning, the storm had passed. A brilliant sunrise shimmered over the soaked vineyards and distant ocean. But inside the villa, the mood was anything but bright. Many guests had quietly departed before dawn, unwilling to remain part of what had turned into a public debacle. Only a smaller group stayed behind, mostly the docuseries crew and a few business allies loyal. To Jameson, though, their loyalty didn't extend to Callista. Meanwhile, social media had exploded. Clips from guests who had secretly recorded Juliet's confrontation before surrendering their phones began circulating. The official docuseries footage was still in post-production, but it didn't matter. The raw phone videos were already doing the damage. News outlets across the globe had a field day. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire's wife crashes wedding in Sonoma scandal." Cole empire teeters as lawsuits escalate. Jameson Cole's once unshakable reputation was unraveling at high speed. Callista's breakdown eclipsed any public sympathy she may have briefly garnered. Word spread that Matteo Duca, the acclaimed designer behind her gown, was threatening to withdraw his name from the piece, refusing to be associated with what he called a circus, not couture. Staff at the estate whispered that Callista had barricaded herself in a private suite, emerging only to scream at anyone who dared knock. Meanwhile, Jameson sat alone in the estate's vast library, whiskey glass in hand. He looked every bit the fallen king, tired, hollow, and lost in thought. One of the producers from the docuseries approached quietly. "Should we keep filming?" he asked. Jameson paused, his mind a churn of remorse, frustration, and chaos. Finally, he nodded. "Keep rolling," he said. Maybe part of him wanted a record of the collapse, something to look back on. Or maybe he still clung to the illusion that he could control the narrative, shape the story, salvage something. But the next blow arrived swiftly. That afternoon, a U.S. court issued an injunction, freezing key Cole International assets tied to the ongoing employee lawsuit. It was a bold legal move that sent a clear message. The courts were taking the allegations seriously. This single decision put millions in pending deals on hold. Jameson had planned to finalize a lucrative contract with a major European pharma group that week. But now, with the company's finances in legal limbo, the entire deal hung by a thread. As the sun dipped low, Callista finally reappeared. Gone was the custom gown and showmanship. She wore a minimalist silk slip dress, her hair tied back. Approaching Jameson, her voice was soft, almost pleading. "We can still fix this," she said. "We just push forward. Keep the wedding private. It's not too late. We have the venue, the guests who stayed. We can still make it official." Jameson met her gaze, his eyes tired, his expression unreadable. "Callista," he said slowly, "do you not see what's happening? The courts are involved. Juliet, me wife, has evidence. Public sentiment has turned. Half the guests are gone. The company's on the brink. She reached out, brushing his shoulder. We're stronger together. If we show unity, we can manage the fallout. But something in Jameson shifted. He thought of Juliet, her quiet strength, her unshakable grace, the way she once believed in him, challenged him, stood beside him not in spectacle, but in substance. He compared that to everything he'd sacrificed for thrills, for image. And suddenly, all the grandeur he'd wrapped around Callista seemed empty. I'm not sure we are better together, he said at last. Callista, he repeated, his voice low but steady. I think I made a mistake. Her eyes widened, blinking fast, uncertain whether the tears forming were from fury or heartbreak. But before she could speak, the camera crew crept closer, lenses glinting, the red recording light glowing. She spotted the light instantly and shifted. Her posture smooth, her chin lifted, her expression softened, like a model searching for her best angle. Jameson noticed the transformation, and it left a bitter taste in his mouth. That was it. She loved the performance, the prestige, the billionaire's wife fantasy. But him? With a sigh, Jameson turned toward the crew. Turn those off. Now. 4 days later, Jameson stepped off a private jet in Boston. An unfamiliar knot of anxiety gripped his chest. He had never traveled with so much emotional weight before. He came alone. Callista remained in Napa, adrift in the aftermath of their aborted wedding. He'd pulled the plug on the entire docuseries. Too much had shattered. He couldn't repair the illusion anymore. Now there was only one thing left to face. The truth with Juliet. A black car took him through tree-lined streets to the home of Dr. Olivia Hart, where Juliet had been staying since leaving Los Angeles. The brownstone was modest compared to the marble and glass of their penthouse, but it radiated a kind of quiet comfort he hadn't felt in years. He knocked, his heartbeat echoing louder than his hand. Olivia answered, her expression unreadable, a mix of guarded disapproval and quiet understanding. She's in the study, she said, stepping aside. Juliet sat by a tall window, sunlight glowing around her. She was focused on a thick stack of papers documents related to the lawsuits, he guessed. She glanced up and carefully placed the pages aside. Neither spoke. The silence was thick with years of shared history, fractured trust, and lingering pain. Finally, Jameson broke it, his voice rough. Juliet, I'm sorry. She didn't flinch, but her gaze studied him carefully, taking in the lines on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes. What are you sorry for? She asked quietly. He looked down, ashamed. For everything. For betraying your trust. For humiliating you. For letting myself get swept up in something so shallow. Her expression was calm, but her eyes shimmered with hurt. There was no satisfaction in watching him break. It only deepened the ache. This was the man she had once loved with every part of herself. Seeing him like this, stripped of arrogance, made it harder, not easier, to hold on to anger. It wasn't just humiliation, Jameson, she said. You broke what we had. Our vows meant something to me. He nodded, emotion flickering across his face. They meant something to me, too. I just lost sight of it. And now I'm paying the price. My company's under threat. The wedding became an international joke. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. But worse than any of that, I hurt you. The only person who ever cared about me before any of this mattered. He gestured vaguely, as if motioning toward the billionaire facade he'd spent years constructing. Juliet folded her hands in her lap. I won't lie, she said calmly. It feels right, finally seeing some accountability. Especially for the people who suffered under Callista. I'm doing everything I can to make sure they're protected. Jameson nodded, his throat tight. I understand. I want to help. Legally, morally, whatever it takes. I'll cooperate with your attorneys. Just say the word. Their eyes met. Truly met for the first time in years. Something raw passed between them, honest, stripped of pride and performance. I appreciate that, Juliet said gently. But as for us, I don't know if things can ever be what they were. His voice faltered. I'm not asking for forgiveness. At least, not yet. I just needed you to know I regret it all. And if there's any chance we could talk, even just to find closure, I'd be grateful." Juliet exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of restraint. "I think we both need time," she said, "to figure out what comes next outside of each other's expectations. But yes, I'm open to talking, to finding a new path, even if it's not the one we once imagined." In that moment, Jameson realized there was still hope, not necessarily for rekindling their marriage, but for becoming someone Juliet could respect again. A chill swept through the streets of Boston as winter set in, marking the passage of months since the Sonoma wedding catastrophe, an event that had forever altered the lives of Jameson Cole and Juliet Montgomery. In the aftermath of the chaos, Cole International moved swiftly to settle the employee lawsuit. Under heavy scrutiny from media and federal investigators, Jameson agreed to a formal hearing that ended in a substantial financial settlement. The company also instituted sweeping workplace reforms and a strict zero-tolerance policy for future abuse. Callista Vaughn, the flashpoint of the scandal, was formally barred from any executive or consulting position within Cole International. Though she narrowly avoided criminal charges, she was ordered to pay massive damages to several plaintiffs. In public, Callista made the rounds on daytime talk shows, dabbing at her eyes and claiming she'd been misrepresented, a scapegoat of sensational media. But the damage was done. Her meteoric rise collapsed. High society turned cold. Invitations vanished. Brand partnerships evaporated. Her once polished social media feed, brimming with designer fashion and curated glamour, took on a desperate tone, each post an attempt to grasp at relevance. Juliet, meanwhile, moved in a different direction, quietly but powerfully. Empowered by clarity and purpose, she partnered with Meredith Langley to launch the Montgomery Langley Initiative, a foundation focused on promoting safe, inclusive workplaces for women and marginalized employees across industries. The scandal had sparked a national conversation, and their first fundraising gala raised millions in a single night. They channeled the funds into legal aid, advocacy outreach, and leadership training programs aimed at dismantling systemic inequality. For Jameson, the fallout sparked a deep reckoning. He could no longer hide behind the glossy exterior of the self-made mogul. Stepping down as CEO, if only temporarily, was both a strategic decision and a humbling personal one. An interim board assumed control, while Jameson embarked on a journey of introspection. He began therapy, attended leadership retreats, and worked with ethics coaches not just to manage his image, but to rebuild the person behind it. It wasn't about salvaging public admiration anymore. It was about rediscovering the values he had traded away for applause. And yet, even amid the soul-searching, Juliet remained ever present in his thoughts. He played their wedding confrontation over and over in his head. Her poise, her clarity, her resolve. He thought of their earlier years, walking hand in hand through her family's coastal vineyard, debating strategy over midnight wine, her intellect always sharp, always grounding. He revisited those memories alone, in the quiet stillness of his penthouse, and felt the sting of a regret deeper than any loss in court or business. On a crisp winter evening, Jameson found himself wandering aimlessly down Beacon Street. Christmas lights twinkled in shop windows, and the scent of roasted chestnuts drifted through the air. He was drawn eventually to the softly lit silhouette of Trinity Church. He stepped inside. Silence embraced him, warm and heavy. Votive candles flickered and rose, and stained glass filtered moonlight onto the polished wood floors. He sank into a pew, his eyes tired. For once, he didn't know what he was searching for. Absolution, maybe, or just a break from the crushing weight of loneliness. And then, a gentle touch on his shoulder. He turned, his heart stumbling in his chest. There stood Juliet, wrapped in a slate-gray wool coat and a soft cashmere scarf. She looked both familiar and distant. There was something in her expression, tentative but steady, that told him everything. She'd come of her own free will. "I heard you've been visiting here," Juliet said quietly, her voice carrying through the old church's arches. "Olivia told me. I wanted to see for myself." A rush of emotions surged in Jameson's chest. I never thought you'd come, he managed, shifting to give her space on the pew. She sat beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Seems we both have a lot on our minds, she said, her gaze rising to the vaulted ceiling. Places like this make you feel small in a good way. Just small enough to remember what really matters. Jameson exhaled, a slow, shaky breath. I've done terrible things, he began. To you, to us. I know saying sorry will never be enough. Juliet was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the flickering candles. No, she said finally. It won't fix everything. But seeing you here, taking responsibility, it means something. Callista's out of my life, Jameson added, his voice firm. Completely. The wedding wasn't legally binding. She's been removed from the company. There's no relationship, professional or otherwise. A faint, wistful smile touched Juliet's lips. Never thought we'd end up here, in a church, talking over the wreckage of what was once a good marriage. She turned to him, her gaze steady. I've been doing a lot of thinking, too. We lost ourselves. We stopped listening. We stopped seeing each other not the version we showed the world, but who we really were underneath. Jameson nodded, his throat tight. I lost you, he admitted. And I lost who I used to be, before success blinded me. Outside, snow had begun to fall, gentle and soundless. Inside, the cathedral remained still, a sacred space suspended in time. I'm not sure I'll ever forget what you did, Juliet said eventually. But I've learned more about myself these past few months than I ever expected to. About my strength, my direction. She looked at him with something close to compassion. I used to think love meant sacrificing pieces of yourself to make it work. But now I know real love doesn't ask you to disappear. And part of me still hopes you'll truly change. Relief mixed with uncertainty in Jameson's face. I want to, he said simply. I'm trying. If there's any chance for us to find some common ground, even slowly, I'll earn it. However long it takes. Juliet nodded, her expression careful but not cold. Let's start by acknowledging that we've both changed, she said, her voice steady but soft. We may never go back to the way things were, and maybe that's okay. We could try to build something new, carefully and respectfully. And if we fail, at least we'll know we tried. Jameson reached out, covering her hand gently with his. She didn't pull away. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, a tentative but unmistakable surrender. It was a delicate, uncertain moment, illuminated by the warm glow of votive candles. All I ask, he whispered, is the chance to try. Juliet nodded, a single tear glimmering in the corner of her eye. And there, in the sanctuary of stone, arches, and colored glass, they found a fragile truce. Not forgiveness, not erasure, but the beginning of something real. A pale sun crept over the skyline of Boston, catching in the windows of high-rises and old brownstones alike. Nearly a year had passed since the disaster in Sonoma, and life had continued in quiet but meaningful ways. Jameson Cole and Juliet Montgomery had not reconciled overnight. Their journey was deliberate, a careful hope born from people once scorched by love and ambition. They began with small check-in calls, then shared emails about property paperwork. The mundane became their bridge. Eventually, they agreed to counseling, not with grand expectations, but with the honest desire to unpack the damage. In the cozy, book-lined office of a sought-after therapist, they started again. I felt invisible, Juliet confessed one gray afternoon. I convinced myself I deserved more, Jameson admitted, but I lost the one thing that mattered. Session by session, the conversations shifted from blame to clarity, from hurt to a shared, raw understanding. Meanwhile, Juliet poured herself into the Montgomery Langley Initiative. What began as a response to her own pain grew into a national platform, a lifeline for those who felt voiceless in toxic work cultures. Cole International, under new, ethical leadership, even became a major partner, a testament to the real changes Jameson was committed to making. As for Callista Vaughn, her star had fallen. A leaked video of her berating a production assistant went viral, and the public turned on her for good. Her attempts to rebrand failed, and she faded into a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Jameson and Juliet slowly rediscovered their shared rituals. They visited art exhibits, cooked side by side in a cozy kitchen far from their cold penthouse, and argued over seasoning before laughing over mismatched glasses of wine. The paparazzi, finding no spectacle, eventually moved on. On a bright autumn afternoon, they walked a winding path by the lake in Boston Common. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts. They stopped at an arched footbridge, its railings wrapped in golden ivy, and watched the boats drift below. "Have you ever noticed how couples are drawn to this bridge?" Juliet asked. "For engagements, wedding photos, slow dances at dusk." Jameson followed her gaze to a young couple laughing with a photographer. A small smile played on his lips. "Maybe it's a place for second chances," he said. "For all kinds of stories." Juliet nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think about second chances a lot lately." Jameson turned to her, his voice quiet and clear. "I never thought I'd get another chance with you, but I'm trying every day, not just for me, but for us, for the people who look to us for something better." Juliet reached for his hand, a simple gesture that carried the weight of everything they'd endured. Her voice was touched by a cautious hope. "I've seen your effort. We've got a long road ahead, but I'd rather walk it with you than alone." He squeezed her hand gently. "Me too." They stood side by side as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the water. A breeze rustled the gold and rust-colored leaves to the ground. In that moment, the story that began in betrayal curved gently into something quieter: hope. They had learned that growth sometimes required the old self to fall away like autumn leaves, making space for something new. In the end, Jameson discovered that true wealth wasn't found in mergers or prestige. It lived in the loyalty he once dismissed and the love he dared to reclaim. Juliet stood stronger than ever, not just as his partner, but as a voice for all who had been pushed aside. Their journey through ruin had become a road to redemption. Because sometimes the most broken things can be mended with sincerity, perseverance, and the willingness to begin again. And so, the story has come to a close. If you're still here with us, truly here in this moment, then maybe something has touched your heart. A thought, an emotion, a quiet truth. This story wasn't just about betrayal and scandal. It was about transformation, about what happens when life cracks you open and you're forced to see yourself clearly, painfully, honestly. Jameson, once blinded by power, fell hard. But it was in the wreckage that he began to rebuild, not with grand gestures, but with humility. And Juliet didn't just survive betrayal. She transformed it. She turned her pain into purpose. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle is the way." Every obstacle in this story, a lawsuit, the public collapse, the broken trust, became the very path that led toward redemption. Not perfection, but progress. And maybe, just maybe, this reminds us of our own lives. That healing is messy. That forgiveness isn't forgetting, but choosing to see more than just the wound. That the people we once were don't have to define who we become. So if you felt even a flicker of truth here, we ask you to like, share, and subscribe. Not for us, but for the next person who needs to hear that even the most shattered parts of us can be stitched back together with grace. And when you wake tomorrow, may you walk forward a little lighter, a little clearer, knowing that your scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof that you endured. Thank you for staying. You are seen. You are valued. And your story, too, deserves to be heard.